Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme we'll be giving you the inside story of why members of Parliament decided to vote for the assisted dying legislation, despite the moral and spiritual consequences this will cause for our nation. And in this programme today, I'm joined by Dr Sarah Tun, apart from Prayer for Parliament and presenter on Revelation TV, together with Derek Mortimer, also representing Prayer for Parliament. So welcome to the programme, both of you. Sarah, I'll start off with you. It's always good to see you on the programme. Just share your thoughts on what was probably the biggest debate in Parliament, and then probably one of the most significant debates in Parliament that we've had probably in a decade, regarding the private members bill, which is the assisted dying legislation, and how our members of Parliament voted in favour, despite this only being like the second reading of this bill.
I think the first thing is to set the scene, basically. Derek and I and some others were there for the entire debate last Friday. The members of Parliament showed great respect and grace and dignity toward one another, which was really wonderful to see. We don't always see that. And the vote was, yes, they voted to proceed and to continue discussing the bill, but the vote was not that, was fairly close, and it was cross-party. So you heard people like Diane Abbott saying assisted dying is a bad idea, along with Donny Kruger on the Conservative side. And all the different parties represented had different viewpoints within the party. So it's really important to get the sense that this is not about Labour or Conservative or Lib Dem or Reform. It's about individual conscience.
Absolutely. And Derek, do you want to give us the kind of inside story, because you were there with Sarah and the rest of the Prayer for Parliament team? I know that you got up extremely early to queue to get into Parliament on a Friday, which was unusual that we had such a prominent vote on a Friday anyway. But share with us your thoughts of the inside view, being in the public gallery and listening to MPs talk passionately about this assisted dying legislation that's been proposed.
Well, I think, as Sarah has just said, we were all there, and it was a very long debate. But as has been said, it was a well-mannered debate, and I felt we were really privileged to be there. A chance to pray quietly as the proceedings went along, and I thought the case for both sides was put across. We obviously wanted the reading to fail, but God knows what He's doing, and yeah, it was a privilege.
And just tell us your thoughts on this very important debate in Parliament last week. Being there, Sarah, being in the public gallery, listening to both sides of the argument, which was a very passionate argument, and I think you make the case very clearly that this is not divided amongst party political lines, because we have Conservatives who support the bill, Conservatives who are against this, Labour members who support this bill, Labour members against it. So in effect, this is not about party politics, is it? It's bigger than that. We're dealing with such rudimental issues of morality when it comes to life and death, and whether it's right to give the power to the state to decide who lives and who dies in those medical situations.
I think that's it in a nutshell. It's giving the power to the state. And those who are for this bill are believing that they're looking at the individual cases and the individual rights to choose how to finish this time on earth, as opposed to those against, who are looking at the bigger picture, and they're looking at what it means for society if we allow people to choose when they die. And that bigger picture, that wider scope, is looking, I think, more realistically at the consequences of this bill passing. So those four are not looking, they don't appear to be looking to disrupt or disturb society, but they seem to have a narrower view. So they're looking with, they say, with compassion on those who are suffering pain with terminal illness, versus those who are against, who are looking at the impact on society, on all people, if this bill goes through.
Yeah. And thank you for your notes that you sent me. A very good little report on WhatsApp on last Friday, and particularly some of the highlights. And one of the highlights you mentioned in your WhatsApp to me, Derek, was the Conservative MP Danny Kruger, who I'm going to quote now from what you said. So he's a Conservative MP who opposed the bill, pointed out that there was not enough safeguards. He said also that this bill was open to future government changes. He also stressed that MPs should not end life. Share with us the importance of prominent Christians like Danny Kruger standing up against this proposed legislation on assisted dying.
Well, as you say, Simon, his case was pretty solid. It was a great performance, and he is a very strong Christian, and it came across in all that he had to say. But I think the trouble is, in the modern church, they're not prepared to speak up. But if you go into the past, people spoke up. William Wilberforce with slavery, that's just one. People, we are told to be salt and light in this time, and Danny Kruger was definitely salt and light.
Which means we need to pray for him more. So
yes,
have a bigger
we do
voice.
indeed.
And Sarah, I mean, what I found so extraordinary about this second reading in the House of Commons, I mean, not only does it generate a huge amount of media coverage, this was like the big political discussion that probably one of the biggest we've had since Brexit a few years ago. But I was also very concerned the fact that this vote took place on a Friday. Now, traditionally, a Friday is always the day that MPs are working in their constituency. And the fact that 45 members of Parliament weren't there to actually vote on this proposed legislation, which has huge implications over life and death. Share with us how this result could have been different had this been held on, say, Tuesday or a Wednesday, rather than posed on a Friday, knowing that maybe some of the members of Parliament whose constituencies are a lot further away from London couldn't actually be in Parliament to discuss and actually vote on this important legislation, because clearly there was no whips involved.
Well, I would say actually I would take a different view, which is that MPs thought it was so important. The House was absolutely packed, standing room only, and very little of that. Absolutely packed, and most of them were in there for the four and a bit hours. So we sat there. I was there the entire time. We saw the occasional one leaving and returning, presumably for personal reasons, food and whatever. But the House was packed, and those 45 who didn't vote, some of them may or may not have been in the House, but it didn't seem to deter people. They seemed to understand the value and importance of this vote. So the fact that it was a Friday, perhaps I would have the opposite view, which was because it was not ordinary, they didn't take it as part of their ordinary day, but instead they stayed rather than going back to their constituencies. Given that there are over 600, if there are 45 that didn't vote, my take on the 45, no idea, but I think they're thinking about it, which is much better than having decided for it. It's harder to persuade them against it, or vice versa, but obviously we lean toward against. But the fact that there were 45 gives also room for scope. We don't know how they will vote, so it's really important, we'll talk about this later, but really important to lobby your MPs.
Absolutely.
Can I just say something?
You can always add something other than my questions.
Yes, I was impressed. The Northern Ireland, the DUP and the other Northern Ireland MPs were all there, and they go home on Thursday afternoon, and they were there. They were going to stand. Mind you, that most of them are Christians, so they wanted to make their say.
No, that's very good. And also on that one, Derek, were you surprised by the vote? So if we look at those who voted for the continuation of the assisted dying legislation, it won by 330 votes to 275, so a loss of 55 votes. Share with us your thoughts on how the vote actually went last Friday.
Well, in the debate, a number of them said they would vote, but they had issues with the safeguarding issue, and I think that is a good point in one sense, because it means when it goes to committee, when it comes to the third reading, there may be a different outlook. And it not necessarily means that it will just go through on the third reading, not necessarily. So I think there's opportunity even for those that voted for may well change their minds. Agreed, we were disappointed, but that's the way it happened to be.
Yeah.
There were MPs on both sides of the House that said, yes, we will vote for this time, but it depends on what safeguards you set up.
Okay, that's
very specifically.
I mean, the other interesting aspect of this one is that a lot of members of Parliament were also saying they didn't have enough parliamentary time to devote to this, which has huge implications not only for our legal system but also for our health system as well. More state control over health and our lives, but also the fact that in light of that, it's very surprising that members of Parliament voted in favour as a majority to take this to committee stage and a third reading. And for our viewers who don't understand Parliament works, Parliament has a first reading where MPs vote on a first reading. Then there's a second reading. Then the amendments can be added to that bill to change the bill. Then it goes to committee stage, then it goes to the House of Lords. House of Lords got to vote in, then it goes back to the Parliament for the third reading. If Parliament vote for that, then it gets sent to the Royal Commission. The King signs it and his signature means it's law. So hopefully I learned something from my A-level politics lessons anyway. But Sarah, I think this is a very important issue in this one is that this bill could still be defeated, but I'm very surprised that the MPs raised such concern they haven't had much time that they decided to vote for it anyway. So surely the most sensible thing would have been done would to be torpedo this legislation, and then in a later date this legislation can come back and they've got more time to vote on it.
The reason given, Kim Ledbetter is the one that introduced the bill, and she said we need to be talking about this. The main argument against the assisted, or one of the primary arguments against this assisted dying bill is that with proper hospice care and proper end-of-life care, then this issue wouldn't arise. So what both sides seemed to agree on was that hospice needs to be improved. And Ms. Ledbetter's argument was we need to keep talking about this. So there may have been people who were leaning towards yes, were perhaps persuaded against in the course of the conversation, but decided, yes, I will vote for this, but we need to talk about it. We need to talk about hospice care and funding and those sorts of things. So her argument in the course of the conversation, the debate on the day, was we need to keep talking. And so by keeping this bill alive, it does keep the conversation going. I'm not sure that I agree with that, but 280 or 380 did. So here we are.
And Derek, what are your thoughts on the spiritual and moral consequences if this legislation is passed? And just for kind of technical reasons, because I don't remember the actual bill itself. So this one's actually called the Terminally Ill Adults End to Life Bill is its official title. So share with us your thoughts on the moral and spiritual implications if members of Parliament decide to bring this into law.
If it comes into law, we have to look at other countries and where they've gone, and the most worrying is Canada, and they are reviewing this whole concept in 2027, and it's going to be completely changed. Now we have this, if this passes, they will set guidelines. But who's to say that a government in the future may not say, oh no, that's a bit too much, we'll just bring it down a little bit more. And a Pandora's box can be opened. And you start off with reasonable rules, and the rules can be changed, and there doesn't seem to be any true safeguards. And in my experience, my God determines when we die,
Our
not
God,
man.
our God as well, you know. We serve the same God. And
God.
Sarah, I think an aspect of this is not being really discussed now, and this is currently the safeguards in place, and I think it's important to tell our viewers what those safeguards are regarding this legislation. So if this legislation is passed into law, 2 doctors have to sign someone off to say they will help
Correction,
them.
2 medical people.
Oh,
so
okay,
this was
that's a
part of the
change.
debate.
That's a
they
change.
didn't say doctors, and,
okay.
and that was part of the debate. So I can't remember the exact terminology, medical, it wasn't expert, medical professional, something like that. So it could actually be a nurse, it was too vague.
Wow.
So the ironclad, sorry to interrupt, but the ironclad, what Kim Ledbetter believes is an ironclad safety mechanism. It all holds.
That's much worse than I thought, because when I was actually reading the safeguards within the kind of one of our national newspapers, I think it was the Daily Telegraph, I can't remember the actual article, but when I did research it did say that this had to be signed off by 2 doctors. Then it has to go to the High Court for approval. Now, the important thing is we can see that this is going to get messy in terms of the number of people that are wanting help to die because they're in that stage of terminal illness. This is going to go through the courts. We know the legal system is already struggling as it is.
The practical implications
So
are
you can
huge,
potentially see a kind of law change coming in. Well, it will be up to the health experts then to decide, rather than the courts, who lives and who dies, which has huge implications because this takes the legal framework out of this, and it won't be up to a judge to decide because of the pressures that are on the NHS. So surely with the number of beds needed, and particularly in the winter season, in flu season, dealing with flus, dealing with COVID, and if we have a similar pandemic time, then this whole legislation becomes extremely messy, gets clogged up, not only kind of in medical terms, but also in terms of its kind of legal process, that the law gets changed anyway to become more liberal and watered down. Isn't that the danger with this?
There are 2 strands to this. So in the course of the debate, at one point toward the end, just before the vote, Ms. Ledbetter had to say, I heard from a judge and they said that I've implied that the High Court has endorsed this, which I have to say they haven't. Now that screams warning, but you know, assuming it was an accidental misleading, not a deliberate lie or anything like that, the water is so muddy. So what she has said is completely ironclad and clear, isn't. So that's one strand. The other strand is down the road. Yes, this is not, down the road they say, okay, well, we don't have the facility to have 2 medical practitioners or 2 doctors to agree to this and a judge, so we'll just make it 1 doctor, or we'll just, whatever. Instead of what is sensible and a safeguard leading the way, it's what becomes convenient based on the fact that it's already inconvenient. And that's completely the wrong way round. So I think that's what you're
So essentially, as you were saying, Derek, that once legislation is passed, it has the ability then to change as the circumstances change. So in this case, we're talking about what safeguards there are could possibly be not safeguards in the future, if I'm making any sense, actually to our viewers as well. So share with us how this is the biggest concern that members of Parliament have, the issue of coercion, that the vulnerable could be coerced into ending their lives, and so could vulnerable women as well with very oppressive partners.
Absolutely, yes, there is great danger. But the one point that, if you don't mind me bringing up, is the whole palliative care. It's underfunded, and if the system worked properly and the hospice were funded correctly, the necessity for this whole legislation will be taken away. And one point I noticed is that as we were looking, I was watching the Health Secretary, and he was taking I noticed he was taking a lot of note of what was in, and I'm praying that the whole aspect of palliative care will be really looked at properly.
Yeah, because he's voted against it, hasn't he?
Yes.
Which is good.
One of the chief arguments for this bill is that palliative care doesn't work for some people because of the nature of the illness. But with it being sorted out, with it being improved across the country, because apparently in some areas it's wonderful, in other areas it's seriously lacking, that should diminish. But yet again, to have a bill like this for a tiny number, no, of course we don't wish anybody to suffer, but for a tiny number, have this bill passed, the danger is, as some MPs mentioned, not just a slippery slope, but a cliff edge.
Yeah. I also, can I add to that as well, with the issue of palliative care, and I do a lot of work for representatives from Voice for Justice UK, and 2 years ago they produced a very chilling report looking at palliative care and the number of people that are dying under palliative care because they're not being fed and they're not being given water to drink, which is a horrible way to essentially die, and the importance of is dying with dignity. If they're terminally ill, continue to feed them, continue to give them water so they don't dehydrate or they don't starve to death. And there's got to be better value of those that are in those helpless situations where they're literally at the end of their lives, that they need to be supported, they needed to be loved before they say goodbye to their lives. And it only reflects a decent society that looks after the most vulnerable society, whether that is the unborn or whether that is those that only have days or months to live. Share with us your thoughts on that one, Sarah.
Well, absolutely. Now, we mentioned we are Christians here, and this is a Christian channel, and our God speaks life into situations. But for those who don't have faith, we can put that aside. It's true, but we can put that aside and look at the moral issue of the value of life and what is dignity. What is dignity in dying? It is to be loved, it is to be nurtured, it is to be taken care of. And the whole argument that, well, if I choose when I die, I can die in a dignified way, the cost to society is too huge, and instead give dignity and love and devotion and kindness while we're alive, and recognize both the one who is ill and the one who is nurturing and taking care of, that life has value right until the end. And for us to cut it short, we have no idea what we are forfeiting.
Yeah. And isn't the danger with this proposed legislation, Derek, is the fact that it empowers the state, that the state becomes God. The state decide who lives and who dies, rather than the sovereignty of the Almighty. And it's the Almighty, the God of Israel, the God of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob, and his son Yeshua HaMashiach, who decides who lives and dies, because we're in his hands. And he knows when we're born, he knows we're going to die unless we're raptured out of here, and then that's a whole different story and a whole different program.
Absolutely. The problem is that we live in a godless society, and we're dealing with a godless government. And there is no concept of heaven or hell. It seems that we die and that's it. And I think that the church has things to answer for, that they don't talk about death properly. And so the whole concept, I agree, the government are taking the upper hand, and they should not. Our God has said clearly in Scripture that there's a time to live, to be born, and a time to die.
Good answer. And so we're coming down to the last few minutes. So can I just give you two questions? The first question is, how much do you think our members of Parliament are being influenced by our mainstream TV coverage, which is highly emotive? And when they discuss this bill, they don't discuss the moral consequences, just the emotional person suffering with a long-term illness and their partner saying, well, isn't it right that they choose when they die to end their pain, so they win kind of public sympathy? And my other one to this one is that how can we and the church again find its place in society by being the moral conscience of the nation?
The moral conscience of the nations, I'll start with that. We need to take what Derek said about the secular society. The church needs to be leading this, and they haven't. So the void has come in, and the state is doing it. Our leaders, this nation is a leader nation, and we are following into death. And not only is it the wrong thing that this nation, that is a leader nation, proven through history, is following, but what it's following is horrific. Jesus, in terms of the moral implications, Jesus said, I come to give life and give it more abundantly. So if there's anybody viewing and thinking, well, God would have compassion on these people that are suffering. Yes, God would have compassion, but he wouldn't demonstrate it by allowing them to kill themselves or allowing them to have assistance in that. But rather, the Jesus I know would offers life, offers wisdom, offers learning right up until the end of death. So quite bluntly, if as a Christian you think that God would be in this bill, then it's not the same Jesus that I'm following, and it's not the same word that I'm believing.
And it's not the Jesus of the Bible either. And Derek, we've got less than 2 minutes of the programme. Now, there's that famous saying that says, it's not over till the fat lady sings, right? And now this bill is not in law yet. So there's still time for our viewers to write to their members of parliament and to pray and intercede. And surely the answer is to pray, 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 and pray more, right?
Absolutely. I think that the trouble is with the majority of the church, they don't really believe what they're praying. And prayer really does change things. We're talking to Almighty God, and He enables us to speak what's on His heart. And so prayer, prayer and prayer.
Great way to finish the programme. So thank you so much, Derek, and thank you so much, Sarah, for your excellent contribution to the programme. I just want to thank you for watching this programme at home. This is a huge issue in politics, a matter of life and death. And as Christians, we can't sit on the sidelines while our parliamentarians decide to change the law in favour of supporting assisted dying. We have to stand up for biblical morality. So contact your MP and continue to pray against this issue, and let's see God's sovereign power work in Parliament. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.